Hello, it's Wednesday and it is time for another edition of Weekend Reading. Normally I describe what weekend reading is, but if you've watched enough of these, you should know what they are, and if this is your first time watching, just watch, you'll figure out what I'm doing. It's not that hard. So let's get right into it. What reads did we have last weekend? Well, we had The Silver Coin, Volume 1, which was a surprisingly good read. I'm not really into horror comic books that much, but this was a good one. A nice anthology series by a bunch of different writers. I liked it a lot. I liked it more than I thought I would. Next up, we had Black Widow, Volume 2, I Am the Black Widow. Another good read. A good continuation of this series. I think this is a Black Widow series that might actually last if they keep up this quality. And then finally we had Ascender, Volume 4, Starseed. This is a really good book. This was the favorite of the week. Ascender has been an excellent series. A direct sequel to the series Descender, which was about, this conflict involving the future and space and robots and aliens and shit. It's centered very much on robots. Ascender has continued that story, and took it in a very different direction. Basically, by keeping this very much the same themes, but adding fantasy to the mix. It took it from science fiction into fantasy by making the story now about magic and vampires, and then bringing the robots, particularly the main robot character, Tim 21, and his family into the mix. And the story's been centered mainly about them, but you don't see a lot of stories that mix robots and magic, but this story did, and it was really good. This is the end of the series, and it was a good ending. It was a good ending to the whole story overall. I really enjoyed it a lot. So yes, Ascender, excellent series. Highly recommend it. Descender too. So, that was last week. What do we got this week? Alright. Let's see. Okay. We got Batman Superman Volume 2, World's Deadliest. Let's see. Batman and Superman battled their deadliest adversaries. In the aftermath of a deadly duel with the Batman Who Laughs, trouble abounds for the Man of Steel and the Dark Knight. From the zombie resurrection of the bottle city of Kandor, to battling the combined might of General Zod and Ra's al Ghul, to being turned into living bombs by the Ultra-Humanite, Batman and Superman are in over their heads and need help in their battle against evil. Enter a new strategy. Track down the biggest baddies in the DC universe before they can do harm to others. A villain database that the world's finest can use to stop problems before they happen. Seems like a good idea, right? Not when the system itself turns on you. A rogue Brainiac program has infiltrated the database, and the sentient hub of all things evil has created a death trap for our heroes on the moon. To defeat the combined might of all the villains in the DCU, Steel and Batwoman join the fray to try to help save the day. But will this Ultra team-up be enough? And that's not all. Really? This is a big book. A ticking time bomb, Solomon Grundy, and the deranged fifth-dimensional antics of Mr. Mixius Pitalik, I think that's how his name is pronounced, and Batmite also plague Batman and Superman in this epic battle royale of a book. This villainous volume collects Batman Superman 7 through 15 and Batman Superman Annual 1. Returning writer Joshua Williamson is joined by the epic artistic talents of Nick Darrington, Clayton Henry, and Max Rayner, and more. Okay, so this is a big one, so this should be good. Next up, we have an interesting read here. This is an interesting new series I've gotten into. The Department of Truth, Volume 2, The City Upon a Hill. Let's see. As a new recruit to the Department of Truth, a top-secret branch of the American government tasked with preventing dangerous conspiracies from altering reality, Cole Turner has seen firsthand the horrifying ways collective belief shaped the world. But the more he learns from his caustic new mentor, Hawk Harrison, about Lee Harvey Oswald's tenure leading the department, the less sure he is that the DOT is on the right side of the war between fact and fiction. And as Tulpa's pure belief given tangible form, start to gain a stronger foothold in the real world, Cole's time to decide where he stands is running out. Eisner Award-winning writer James Tinian IV and breakout artist Martin Simmons continue their thought-provoking trip down the rabbit hole with revelations that turn everything you thought you knew about the Department of Truth upside down. Collecting the Department of Truth 8 through 13. 8 through 13. Was it really that many issues in the first volume? That's a lot. Alright, yeah, but this has been an interesting book. Interesting concept. And finally, we have Fantastic Four, Volume 8, The Bride of Doom. Rules of engagement. The Human Torch's love life is changed forever when he must choose between his soulmate Skye and his ex-wife Elijah. But wait, is Crystal back in town? Speaking of romance, an old enemy is about to take a momentous step. You are cordially commanded to Latveria for the royal wedding of Dr. Doom. But why is Mr. Fantastic acting as best man? And how will the groom's actions profoundly change one member of the Marvel's first family? Plus, Reed and Ben explore a bizarre new realm, and Kang's entire bloodline is out to destroy every era of the Fantastic Four. How can Reed, Sue, Ben, and Johnny hope to survive the simultaneous attacks from their lifetimes by Ramatut, the Scarlet Centurion, Kang the Conqueror, and the Sinister Scion? Collecting Fantastic Four 31 through 35 by Dan Slott, Mark Waid, R.B. Silva, Javier Rodriguez, Luca Maresca, John Romita Jr., Paul Renaud, Jason Liu, J.P. Mayer, Jesus Abertov, and Marta Gracia. Fantastic Four has been good lately, so we'll see what that's like. So that's next weekend. So what are we talking about today? How are we wrapping this up? Well, today we're going to go back to a simple question of the week. Right back where we started. Okay. So the question of the week this week is one that's been on my mind quite a lot for many years, and one that's been brought up. That gets brought up a lot, especially when it comes to the major comic book publishers. And it's about ripping off characters and storylines. My specific question is, what do you think is the biggest ripoff in comic books? Because they rip off a lot. And that's not even getting into like sales tactics and ways to try to make their comic books more interesting. I mean, those are more business decisions. I'm talking more of from the creative end. Who creatively ripped people off? I'm talking about real ripoffs, because not everything is a ripoff. Sometimes things are such a blatant, obvious ripoff that it's obviously supposed to be more of an homage. Like you have the Justice League, but there's homages to the Justice League. Like in Marvel, you have the Squadron Sinister and then later on the Squadron Supreme. They're obviously such an obvious ripoff of the Justice League characters that it's intentional. It wasn't meant to be like we're stealing this idea. These characters are intended to be direct correlations to those. That was the whole point. That's why they made them the enemies of the Avengers. Now, what you could say is a ripoff is that in, I believe it was 2004, I want to say. Let me look that up. Yes, 2004, they relaunched the Avengers. They relaunched a new Avengers team with all of the most popular characters of the Marvel Universe of that time making up the new Avengers. So you had old Avengers like Captain America and Iron Man, but now they were teamed up with characters who had never been Avengers before, like Spider-Man, Luke Cage, Spider-Woman, Wolverine, this guy named Sentry, who was just a thrown-in character, who I'll get to later on. I'll get to again later on. But that seemed more like a bit more of an Avenger, a JLA type ripoff. I'm not sure if that was really intentional, but it did come off that way. It felt like the Justice League version of the Avengers, or the Avengers version of the Justice League. I don't know. You can put that however you want. I was talking about homages. I had another. Oh yes. And then, of course, there's books like The Boys, where they had the Seven, who are obviously supposed to be correlations to the Justice League. But that was a book making fun of comic books and superheroes directly, so that made sense. So it was supposed to be an allegory of sorts, or definitely more of an homage, but not really an homage because it was insulting the characters. But it was an intentional ripoff. It was a blatant ripoff intentionally, because you're supposed to get that these are supposed to be these guys. Now, I was going to mention the Sentry, and the reason for that is because, getting to Superman. There are so many rip-off characters of him. I mean, so many. It would take me... Sentry is just one. He's just one in the Marvel Universe. There's also... I mentioned the Squadron Supreme. There's also Hyperion. There's also Gladiator. That's just the ones in the Marvel Universe. That's not even counting the ones outside of the Marvel Universe. But Superman is such a generically powered character. He's an iconic character, but his powers are so generic, it's hard not to copy them to some degree. And there's so many characters that are supposed to be blatant copies of him. I'll put up pictures of them. There's just so many. And now I don't even think that's all of them, the pictures I just put up. But one of them is important. One of them is very significant. And that one would be this guy, Shazam. Shazam might be a character you hear about. He had a movie recently, and he's got another movie coming up. He is currently a DC Comics character. I say currently because he did not start as a DC Comics character. You see, back in Shazam was created in 1940 by the publisher Fawcett City Comics. Shazam became a wildly popular character. So popular that his comic book actually started to outsell Action Comics, which was Superman's comic book. Superman at that time was the most popular character. Superman had been published first in 1938. Superman was the most popular superhero for a while, but then Shazam came on the scene and outclassed him. Started becoming more popular, started selling better. You have to remember, back in the day, these comic books were being sold to the people they were intended to be sold to, little boys. And Superman was appealing, of course, but the thing that made Shazam more interesting is his story was... Superman's story was very science fiction-y. Shazam's story was very fantasy. He's magic-based. So you can get a little crazier with fantasy than you can science fiction. Science fiction is still based somewhere in the realms of science. You're just bending science fact. With fantasy, you're throwing science out the window. Also, Shazam is interesting because he's actually a child who says a magic word and then gains the powers of Superman, basically. They've evolved his powers a little bit in recent years, but originally, he basically just was a magic version of Superman. And because of these factors, he outsold Superman. But the problem is, he was a magic version of Superman. So DC Comics, which was a bigger publisher at the time and had way more money, sued Fawcett City for copyright infringement. I think in 1953 they sued them. So they literally put up with over a decade of having Fawcett City fucking stomp on their sales before they sued them. And then in 1953, as a result of this lawsuit, Fawcett City couldn't compete, and they actually had to fucking close their doors. This leads to another interesting thing, because at the time, an English publisher was republishing American comic books, including the Fawcett City Shazam. At the time, Shazam was known as Captain Marvel. That would be a whole other legal issue later on down the road that would get resolved, but we're not here to talk about all the legal troubles. But Shazam, or Captain Marvel, because they were publishing his books that were really popular in England, and because they now couldn't, because Fawcett City wasn't publishing anymore, this English publisher decided, well, we need to do something. So they literally just took the character, changed him slightly into a new guy called Marvel Man, and they started publishing him as just an original book. But his story was, he's still basically Shazam. He said a magic word and gained special powers. I don't think his word was magic anymore. I think it was now a science experiment. But I think he said the word atomic backwards, and now he can gain superhuman abilities, which are basically just Superman's abilities. So he's kind of a Superman. He's a Superman ripoff via being a Shazam ripoff, a direct Shazam ripoff. And later on down the line, because of legal issues, Marvel Man would be changed to Miracle Man, and then I think he's a character is actually owned by Marvel Comics nowadays. And then in the 80s, DC Comics bought the rights to Shazam, so they own the character now. So that's why he ended up being published again. But that's just the whole thing of rip-offs with Superman. But like I said, Superman is such a generically powered character, it's hard not to rip him off. And obviously a lot of these characters who are rip-offs are meant to be homages as well. They're meant to be kind of blatant rip-offs because they're Superman-esque characters. So that's still not really what I'm talking about, despite going into it in such fucking depth. I'm talking about some more very, very, very blatant rip-offs. I'm talking about like how in, let's see, where are we here? How in you might have heard of, like, say, the X-Men, of course. The X-Men were first published in Uncanny X-Men #1 in September of 1963. They were a character of these weird, outcast superhumans who were treated as freaks by society, who were led by an enigmatic genius, wheelchair-bound genius. Okay? They're famous characters, very popular. The problem is, so it's like, okay, what does this have to do with rip-offs? Because 3 months earlier, in June of 1963, a comic book was published called My Greatest Adventure number 80, which introduced a team of characters. This is for DC Comics. That introduced a group of characters called the Doom Patrol. The Doom Patrol were a group of outcast, superpowered freaks who were led by an enigmatic wheelchair-bound genius. So, they even had similar enemies, like the X-Men fought a group called the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, while the Doom Patrol fought a group called the Brotherhood of Evil. I mean, it's almost blatant. Many people pointed out that there seemed to be a blatant ripoff here, although the creator of Doom Patrol originally said he just believed it was coincidence. Though years down the road, he would go on to say that he started to think that it wasn't coincidence, that, you know, maybe somebody did rip him off, though there's never quite an explanation how. Publishing and printing things took a lot of time back then, so it was just like, you know, how could they have known, you know, did they really, like, how could they have known about each other? But maybe, you know, a lot of these guys knew each other. They might have shared ideas might have gotten cross-pollinated. Like, all these writers back then were all work for hire. There's no specifically working for one group necessarily. So maybe somebody said something to somebody, shared an idea, and somebody just took it and ran with it. There's another example of this. DC has a character known as Swamp Thing, who was introduced in House of Secrets 92 in July of 1971. But in May of 1971, there was Marvel published an issue of Strange Tales #1 where they introduced a character called Man-Thing. These characters are almost exactly the same character. They are both scientists who were involved in tragic accidents in a swamp where they were then turned into weird swamp creatures who, despite being created by science, also have weird mystical properties to them as well. They were almost exactly the same creature. They were almost exactly the same character. I mean, even origin-wise, it's ridiculous how similar they are. And in fact, the writers of both books of those times were actually roommates. So I don't know if it was somebody just ripped somebody off, or somebody was just like, hey, overheard something that the other one was saying, or saw something and just got it in his head. But it seems like a pretty blatant case of somebody ripping off somebody there. I mentioned Superman and the character Gladiator. Superman has been associated with a group called the Legion of Superheroes, who were introduced in a Superman-esque book called Adventure Comics number 247 in March of 1958. It's pretty apparent that another group that Gladiator is involved with, Gladiator, who's supposed to be who's a blatant ripoff of Superman, is part of a group called the Imperial Guard, who were introduced in X-Men 107 in October of 1977. This is one of those cases that it's not so much meant as it's obvious that they're copying the Legion of Superheroes and Superman with these characters, so that it's not meant as like, oh, we didn't mean that. It's like, obviously they meant that as a ripoff. It was meant that. So it's more of an homage situation, again. Then there's another famous one. There's Robin, the famed sidekick of Batman, who was introduced in Detective Comics 38 back in March of 1940. No, I'm sorry, April of 1940. I keep saying March. April of 1940. I think the Legion of Superhero ones, I said March as well. That's also April. April of 1940. They introduced Robin. In March of 1941, in Captain America comic books, they introduced his sidekick, Bucky. It was obvious that Bucky was supposed to be a direct response to Robin. Bucky was an obvious ripoff of Robin. Now, the thing is, DC would continue with the teen superhero trend for years to come, whereas Marvel didn't, because Stan Lee always famously said he thought teen sidekicks were a dumb idea. He thought that, nobody would accept superheroes being that irresponsible to bring a child into fucking combat against villains and, terrorists and shit. Although Bucky would later come back, but that's another story. Actually, one that I will get to. Actually, looking at what I have here, I think I'm actually going to get right into it. I'm going to get into what I think is the most blatant ripoff, at least in my time, that I have ever seen. We're gonna go back a couple years. We're going to go back over about 15 years, actually. In 2006, between July of 2006 and January of 2007, Marvel published a mini-series called Civil War. This is their major comic book event of the year 2006. It would go on to reshape the Marvel Universe for quite some time. It would even be the inspiration for a movie. At the end of Civil War, it's a conflict between Captain America and Iron Man over a new government program involving superheroes. At the end of Civil War, Captain America is arrested. Then, in an issue of Captain America, just 3 months later, in April of 2007, Captain America is killed due to the machinations of one of his arch enemy, the Red Skull. Okay. It's a pretty good story. It was actually a very popular story at the time. It was a well-written, really good story. Okay, so is that a ripoff of something? Where was that ripped off? I'll get to that. We're going to fast forward a couple more years. About 2 years exactly. DC publishes a mini-series called Final Crisis. That is their big mini-series of 2008. They start publishing it in July of 2008. It wraps up in March of 2009 due to a number of delays. It's a really weird series written by Grant Morrison, so it can be kind of hard to understand. But during that series, Batman is supposedly killed by the villain Darkseid. Now, whilst Captain America wasn't killed in Civil War, he was killed as a direct result of the events of Civil War, so you could still see him as the casualty of it. So these things are similar-esque. There's similarities between Batman and Superman to begin with, so it's like you could see these as sort of similar. Not exactly the same, but certainly similar. Okay? But it doesn't seem like necessarily it's a direct ripoff, especially since they're so many years removed. Here's where things get weirder. After Captain America died, his former sidekick Bucky, who had now returned from the dead as the Winter Soldier, took on... Bucky and Robin both evolved into their own unique characters, the Winter Soldier and Nightwing. Bucky, after Captain America supposedly died, took up the role of a new Captain America, filling the void that the now dead Steve Rogers had left. After Batman had died, his role was filled by Robin, Dick Grayson, as the new Batman, filling the role that Bruce Wayne had left. Now these similarities are becoming a little more similar. But, I mean, those stories kind of make sense. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a rip-off of each other. It's a simple idea. You could just kind of see everyone coming to that conclusion. Here's where it starts to get a little bit more blatant, at least to me. The series to bring back Captain America was a series that ran from July of 2009 to January of 2010 called Captain America Reborn. This is a series that said that Steve Rogers was not actually dead. His death was just a feint by his arch nemesis that resulted in him traveling randomly through time to the point that he was supposed to eventually return to the present for the eventual culmination of his arch enemy's plans to come to fruition, to come to their true fruition. The reintroduction of Batman, Bruce Wayne, to the DC universe was a story called Batman, The Return of Bruce Wayne, which ran from May to November of 2010. This was a story that revealed that Bruce Wayne was not really dead, that he was traveling randomly through time as a result of the machinations of Darkseid, the villain who supposedly killed him, and that his return to the present was supposed to be the culmination of the plans that would bring forth the true machinations of what he was trying to do. It's the same fucking story. I mean, almost bit for bit. It's the same. The weirdness of that story and the similarities of it, somebody ripped off somebody. Somebody copied somebody. The weird thing is, they're both stories written by writers who you don't think would do that. The Captain America story was written by Ed Brubaker. The Batman story was written by Grant Morrison. These are both very creative guys, especially Morrison, who is a very unique writer. You don't imagine that these are the type of guys that would rip people off. But god damn it, the similarities between those two, somebody ripped somebody off. Somebody copied somebody there, man. It's impossible. Those stories are too fucking close. They're just too fucking close. So that's it. The death and returns of Batman and of Captain America and Batman are on too similar of a fucking scale to me for you to tell me that somebody wasn't copying somebody. And considering that the Marvel stories came first, you could say that they were easily the ones that have been ripped off. But since I pointed out earlier that one of their most successful comic book properties, the X-Men, are a ripoff of a much less successful comic book property that DC had, the Doom Patrol, you could argue that maybe DC was a little owed. But DC were also cunts, so, you know what, fuck them. But yes, the deaths and returns of Superman and Captain America and Batman are, in my opinion, the most blatant example of of one publisher ripping off another story-wise. But tell me what you thought. That went on long. My bad. But yeah, that's it. So, I hope you enjoy your weekend, and I hope you enjoy your reading. Have a good one.